Bismillah walhamdulillah wassalatu wassalamu ala rasulillah. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. And welcome back to the new series here at ICJC. Inshallah, our intention in this series is to go through the tafsir of Surah Al-Mulk bi'idhnillahi ta'ala. The objective of this series is to take a deeper dive into the surah, inshallah. Instead of usually our khutbahs and our halaqas tend to focus on snippets of the Quran, a verse here, a lesson there and a lesson there. The objective of this series is for it to serve as an educational series, an opportunity for you and I to take a deeper dive into the Quran and inshallah reflect on some of its beautiful lessons and to connect with this surah. The first step in understanding any surah, in understanding anything in general, is understanding it within its context. Imam Suyuti rahimahullah ta'ala has a beautiful book titled Asraru Tartib al-Quran. In this book, he highlights some of the gems and the secrets and the beauties and the nuances of the structure of the Quran. And underneath the chapter of Surah Al-Mulk, he highlights a beautiful thing where he highlights that this surah and one of the primary goals and objectives of this surah is to connect the reader, to connect the Muslim with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, to develop a heart that is connected to Allah, that has Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala centered first and foremost, to allow for you and I to live a life that puts Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala first. And he highlights that this surah does so by connecting two ideas from the previous juz and the juz that is coming. You see, in the previous juz, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala speaks about how faith needs actions to reflect the reality of that faith. And so Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He starts off the previous juz speaking with the surah, Surah Al-Mujadala, the surah about how your faith should lead you to having positive interactions with your family. The next surah, Surah Al-Hashr, speaks about how our faith is the foundation to our interactions with community and between one another as Muslim brothers and sisters. This subject and this concept is continued in Surah Al-Mumtahina. Then you get to Surah Al-Saf, and in Surah Al-Saf, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala speaks about how that faith leads us to obedience of the prophets, alayhimus salatu wassalam. And then the next surah, Surah Al-Jumu'ah, speaks about how the faith is actualized by the Muslim and not being like those people who are like donkeys where the books of revelation are just laying on top of them. And so Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala very appropriately and aptly highlights this reality in Surah Jumu'ah that the believer should not be like the donkey in that sense that is just carrying knowledge. Rather, that knowledge should be something that changes you, something that affects you, something that transforms you. And so in Surah Jumu'ah, Allah speaks about how then the believer is the person who lets go of their connections, their responsibilities, their desires, and they come to the masjid every single Friday to hear that sermon, to connect with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, to hear that reminder. The very next surah after that again continues this idea of faith that is actualized with action in Surah Al-Munafiqun, a surah about the hypocrites, which are literally people who say one thing but believe something else. What they're saying on their tongue does not match their hearts, hence their actions are not matching their faith. Surah Al-Taghabun and then Surah Al-Talaq continue this idea of faith actualized in action, in teaching us to prepare for the hereafter. And Surah Al-Talaq actually kind of has both of these, where you're being told to prepare for the hereafter and you're being told to trust Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, but we're also being taught once again, as the chapter, as the juz started with, that we're being taught and we're being told that our faith should lead us to positive actions with our families. And Surah Al-Tahrim then continues this idea, highlighting that the responsibility of each of us is to protect ourselves and to protect our families from the fire of hell. As Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions in Surah Al-Tahrim, Ya ayyuhalladhina amanu, qu anfusakum wa ahlikum nara. Right? O you who believe, protect yourselves and protect your families from a fire, from this fire of hell, that its light will be human beings and will be stones. And so you have all of these surahs, you have all of these chapters in the previous juz speaking about how faith needs to be actualized with actions. And the surah concludes with, at the end of Surah Al-Tahrim, highlighting that your actions are yours and yours alone. That no one can do your actions for you. It's not enough that you come from a good family. And a lot of times you and I can use this as a crutch, where sometimes we may think to ourselves that, oh, my parents used to do this and this and this. And we use that sometimes almost as an excuse to not do good ourselves. That, oh yeah, my dad used to pray all the time. Oh, my mom used to pray tahajjud, or my cousin does this, or I'm from the lineage of this companion, or oh, the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam is in my lineage. So At-Tahrim ends with this stark reminder, this clear reminder of the wives of the prophets, and gives examples of wives of the prophets that ended up in hellfire, like the wife of Lut, right? And then you have examples of the opposite, the wives of tyrants that ended up in paradise, like the wife of Fir'aun. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gives these examples in Surah Al-Tahrim. The very next surah then is Surah Al-Mulk. And Surah Al-Mulk and the next juz, the 29th juz of the Quran, really are focusing more on spirituality. And Surah Al-Mulk focuses on understanding the kingdom of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and submitting to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The surah after that, Surah Al-Qalam, then speaks about how submitting to Allah will protect you in this life and it will protect you in the next life. And in the next life, you will be asked to prostrate to Allah. And unless you prostrated in this life, you will not be given permission to prostrate in the next life. And may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala protect us. It's a very scary ayah, and actually, in my mind, one of the scariest ayahs in the entire Quran, in which Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala highlights that He will summon people and He will ask the people to bow down, to do sajda. But they won't be able to. Their bodies will be stiff. وَيُدْعَوْنَ إِلَى السُّجُودِ وَهُمْ سَالِمُونَ. Why? Because in this world, in this dunya, you were called to sajda while you were healthy, and you refused. And so Surah Al-Qalam speaks about how this faith is necessary for your success in this life and in the next life. Then Surah Haqqa and Surah Al-Ma'arij are very heavy surahs about the hereafter and preparing for the Day of Judgment and how intense the reality of the Day of Judgment is going to be, etc., until the end of this juz. And so the 29th juz really focuses on this idea of spirituality, this idea of belief. And the 28th juz, the previous juz, speaks about how that belief needs to be actualized in actions. The link between these two ajza is now Surah Al-Mulk, in which now Surah Al-Mulk is highlighting the thing that will motivate your action, the thing that will be the source of your belief, the thing that will allow you to make those struggles, to put the effort forward when you need to, is going to be understanding and submitting to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, understanding the sovereignty of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And so Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He starts off this surah by saying what? تَبَارَكَ الَّذِي بِيَدِهِ الْمُلْكِ. Glory be to the one who in His hand is the kingdom of all things. And so this surah is all about recognizing that kingdom of Allah, putting Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala centered in our hearts, and recognizing His majesty and submitting to Him. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala make us a people that worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala the way He deserves to be worshipped. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala make us a people that are always remembering Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in every aspect of our days. The placement of this surah is truly a beautiful placement, and it lays the foundation to some of the secrets yet for us to discover here in this surah. I encourage you to join us, inshaAllah, for the rest of our series, bi'idhnillahi ta'ala. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.